Welcome everyone to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm David Moeller, I represent Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt here. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.boston_non_DISCRIMINATION. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any other technical difficulties, please contact Ibu Quarishi at the MPO staff at iqurishi@ctps.org or 857-702-3695 or via the chat box. And I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Ibu. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. Please raise your hand via Zoom if you would like to use an AI note taker during this meeting. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. Please call the roll.
Certainly. David Moeller,
Yes.
Pardon me,
That's
Mascot
okay.
seat 1, acknowledging.
Yeah. This is David Moeller, I'm here.
Excellent. Mascot seat 2.
John Bichard, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver, present.
Good morning, John. Mascot Highway Division. Do not see John Romano as of yet. The MBTA.
Good morning, Sandy Johnson, representing General Manager Phil Lang in the MBTA.
Good morning. Regional Transportation Authorities, Metro West Transit Authority.
Good morning, Tyler Tarasi, representing Administrator Jim Nee for the MWRTA, present.
Good morning and welcome. Massport.
Good morning, this is Sarah Lee representing Massport.
Good morning. MAPC.
Morning, Julia Wallers for Eric Barassa, MAPC.
Good morning. MBTA Advisory Board. Once again, calling the MBTA Advisory Board.
Hannah Swolikowski, MBTA Advisory Board.
Welcome. City of Boston, seat 1.
General representing the City of Boston, and Mayor Michelle Wu.
Hello. City of Boston, seat 2.
Morning, this is Matt Moran, representing the City of Boston, Mayor Wu.
Morning. At-large city, City of Everett.
Good morning, Jay Monty, representing Mayor DiMaria in the City of Everett.
Good morning. At-large city, City of Newton.
Good morning, David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
Good morning. At-large town of Arlington.
John Alessi, representing Select Board Chair Diane Mahan in the town of Arlington.
Hello, John. At-large town of Brookline.
Good morning, Erin Shute, representing Select Board Chair Bernard Green for the town of Brookline.
Morning, Erin. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Katiana Ballantyne in the Intercore.
Good morning. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, town of Acton.
Good morning, Nate Ryan, alternate for the Magic Subregion, representing Acton Select Board Chair Dean Charter.
Good morning. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti, representing Metro West, and Mayor Charles Ziski of Framingham.
Hello. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing Mayor Cahill and the North Shore Task Force.
Morning. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Good morning. This is John Strauss representing the town of Burlington. Mike Espayo, Chairman of the Select Board and the North Suburban Planning Council.
Good morning. South Shore Coalition, Town of Hall. Not see Chris as of yet. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Rentham.
Rachel Benson, Director of Planning and Economic Development in Rentham, SWAP, and Chairman of the Board of Selectmen.
Good morning. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Good morning, Tom. I will now call there are representatives from the Federal Highway Administration. Do not see Anthony. The Federal Transit Administration. And with that calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report, and I don't have one today, so we will go directly to the executive director's report. Tegan?
Thank you, David. And hello, everyone. I'm Tegan Tyke, the executive director of the Boston Region MPO. And in my report out today, I'll cover some of the usual topics with an announcement, an update on engagement activities, some grant and funding activity updates, and then I'll briefly summarize today's agenda and highlight some of the next dates for meetings coming up. Next slide, please. So first, in terms of announcements, I wanted to let this board know about an opportunity that I and some of your other colleagues have been offered to attend the new Shared Mobility Summit, which is going to be held in mid-September. And I've been invited to attend this event as the executive director of the MPO as a regional agency, along with other colleagues within the region, with the intent of this summit bringing together 10 different teams of what they are calling change leaders from metropolitan regions across the country. So Boston being one of those. And the stated goal of the summit is to build a change community, which is really intended to be a more connected and cohesive network of colleagues in leadership roles who can really work together to accelerate transportation goals, particularly a shift to more people-centered mobility. So the members of each change team are intended to represent a range of agency stakeholders in the transportation space. So that's public and private and nonprofit sector representatives, focused on anything from policy and funding to infrastructure and even operating service. So I'm really excited to attend with some representatives from some of the agencies at this table, as I mentioned, like MassDOT and MBTA, some of the municipalities like Boston and Somerville, and as well as a few other agency advocate and business representatives. So if you'd like to learn more, hopefully someone will be able to post a link to the event in the chat. And I will certainly look forward to coming back and reporting back to this board about what we've been able to accomplish from that regional perspective. Slide, please. So in terms of an engagement update, I wanted to share that we will have the first public meeting of the newly formed Community Advisory Council on September 4th at 1 p.m. It will be public. The agenda and materials will be posted to the MPO calendar in advance. And at that meeting, the Advisory Council will be holding elections for its leadership positions, discussing its charter, and learning more about the long-range planning and TIP development processes. So the fact that they're holding elections means that they will select their representative who will sit on this board with you all. And hopefully that'll be starting in later September or October. Next slide, please. All right, so in the grant space, we've reached some really significant milestones in terms of grants that we have already been awarded and we've been carrying out the work for. So first, we recently completed the pilot design for the Mobility, Access, and Transportation Insecurity, or MATI grant. The way that this grant is set up, it's intended to result in designs that provide an affordable community electric vehicle car sharing to be able to help improve access to a real transit-focused multimodal system with a focus on the transportation insecure residents. And in our grant's case, those residents in Chelsea and Revere specifically. So just as a reminder, this grant is managed by the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies, and it's funded by the FTA. And the focus is to help identify and address factors that lead to transportation insecurity. And secondly, our No Heat project, which is funded through the state's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Action Grant, has wrapped up its first phase. And in that phase, we developed high-resolution data to help identify the heat risks that people walking and biking face throughout our region. Now, the second phase, which also has begun, it began in July, involves a partnership with 4 municipalities, that's Chelsea, Everett, Revere, and Framingham, and 4 advocacy organizations. Those are Walk Massachusetts, Mass Bike, Bike to the Sea, and the Mystic River Watershed Association. And together we are conducting walk and bike audits with those partners to really think about and focus on recommending planning, design, and the implementation of heat mitigation pilots. So such as cool walking and biking corridors with more greenery, reflective pavement, shaded shelters, and transit waiting areas that can provide relief from those heat impacts. So we'll be very excited to be back next month with presentations on these projects, but I wanted to make sure I highlighted where we are and what you'll be hearing about coming up in the next month. So next slide, please. Today's agenda, 4 items to highlight here. First of all, there will be an adjustment to the FFY 2025 tip. That adjustment will include some minor cost changes to 2 Blue Bites projects, which results in a net cost decrease. So it's at the scale that it's at, it qualifies as an adjustment, not an amendment. And secondly, Adrienne and Ethan together will be presenting a quarterly readiness update for the 4th quarter of the federal fiscal year. We've been doing this on a quarterly basis, but this time, because we are at the end of the federal fiscal year, Ethan's going to be framing up this update in the context of changes we've seen for the last year plus to really illuminate the cumulative effect that changes have had leading up to this federal fiscal year Q4, and to sort of understand better the resulting impact on the MPO's ability to advance the regional priorities that you established. So we will follow this with a proposed amendment 14, which would enable us to accommodate those Q4 readiness and cost updates that you'll learn about during that presentation. But really what we hope that this conversation will enable or be sort of the foundation for continued and ongoing conversations with the TIP committee and then eventually at the board as well about policies that we can develop to help mitigate the effects that we've seen. So as I mentioned, there'll be an amendment 14, which Ethan will present, and it has cost and schedule changes to 2 projects in the regional target program and 1 in the statewide highway program. But given that we are nearing the end of the federal fiscal year, the board will be asked to waive the public comment period for the amendment to make sure that we can advertise those projects and fully utilize the remainder of the federal fiscal year 2025 funding. And then I'll come back to you and have a presentation about an opportunity that we have to respond to a U.S. Department of Transportation request for information about input into the next surface transportation authorization. So I'll share with you a summary that we have developed of what we've developed as a document that we can produce for that input. Next slide. So the next meeting will be September 4th, as I mentioned. Just to note that we'll be on the same day as a Community Advisory Council meeting and a TIP committee meeting. I don't think there's too much overlap between those groups, but that will normally not be the pattern. It's just been very tricky scheduling things in these last months of the summer and going into the fall. In addition, I'll just verbally highlight that October board meetings have been shifted from the 1st and 3rd week to the 2nd and 4th week, October 9th and 23rd. Due to October 7th or 2nd falling on a religious holiday. So you've received emails about this, but I just wanted to verbally highlight it as well so that you are saving those dates. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Are there any at this time? Seeing none, if you want to comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will try to call on you. Next item is committee chairs reports. Anybody? Seeing none. Next item is the approval of the minutes of June 26th. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes? And please state your name for the record when making the motion. Jen.
Fine. I will motion to, this is Jen Grove, City of Boston. I'll motion to approve the June 26th meeting minutes.
Thank you. John Alessi.
It's John Alessi. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Certainly. David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Tyler Terrassi,
Tyler Terrassi, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Julia Wallers,
Julia Wallers, yes.
Hannah Switlikowski,
Hannah Swilakowski, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Jen Rowe, yes.
Matt Moran,
Matt Moran, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kosis, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Nate Ryan,
Nate Ryan, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
John Strauss,
John Strauss, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Nice. Next item on the agenda is tip adjustment number 4, Ethan Lapointe. Oh, I'm sorry, Adriana Jacobson.
No worries, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Adriana Jacobson, and I am a transportation planner on the MPO activities team. This presentation will summarize adjustment 4 for the federal fiscal years 25 to 29 tip, and we will request that the board vote to endorse this adjustment today. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Adjustment 4 includes changes to 2 Blue Bike State of Good Repair projects. Both are funded in the FFY 2025 year in the Regional Target Program, and the cost adjustments are due to the difference between the anticipated costs of the contract and the actual itemized costs. Both cost changes are relatively small and amount to a net decrease of about $90,000. As Tegan said before, according to our public engagement plan, this is an adjustment because if a project is valued at $5 million or less, the threshold for requiring an amendment is a cost change of $500,000 or more. If you can go on to the next slide, please. To go into further detail, and if you can go into the following slide as well, the Cambridge Blue Bike State of Good Repair project has a cost decrease of about $117,000, and the Brookline project has a cost increase of about $26,000, again, totaling to a cost decrease of about $90,000. If you could go on to the next slide, please. And the following one after that, the MPO staff requests that the board endorse adjustment 4. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Adriana. Any questions? Seeing none, can I get and again, this is a final action. We don't need a public process. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the adjustment number 4 as presented today? And please state your name for the record when making the motion. John Strauss.
John Strauss, I move that the board endorses adjustment 4.
Thank you. Is there a second? Jen Rowe.
Second that motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
Certainly. David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Sandy Johnston,
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Tyler Terrassi,
Tyler Terrassi, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Julia Wallers,
Julie Wallers, yes.
Hannah Switlikowski,
Hannah Swilakowski, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Jen Rowe, yes.
Matt Moran,
Sorry for the delay. Matt Moran, yes.
No problem. Thank you. Jay Monty,
Monty, yes.
was that a yes?
Yes, he said
Monty,
yes.
yes.
Roger, thank you. David Kozis,
David Kosos, yes.
John Alessi,
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Nate Ryan,
Nate Ryan, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
John Strauss,
John Strauss, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Anyone that I have not called? Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is TIP Quarterly Readiness Update. Ethan Lapointe.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Lapointe. I'm a senior planner on the MPO activities team. I also help to manage the Transportation Improvement Program. My first presentation here today, if we can go on to the next slide, is one of our quarterly readiness updates for providing updates on projects that are funded within the MPO's Regional Target Program. Now, as part of today's presentation, this presentation actually ties into the next action item on the agenda and is in part meant to give additional context for that action item, or rather to set a broader context. I'll start today's presentation by reminding members of this board what the role of a quarterly readiness update is, given this has been the first year that they have been deployed, and also talk about the objective of what we're trying to convey with today's readiness update. Namely, this is intended, now that we're in Q4 of federal fiscal year 2025, to be a year in review of sorts of the 2025 Regional Target Program. With that said, despite it being a year in review, the actual periods of time we'll be looking at as far as decision-making from this MPO board will go back all the way to June 2023 with the development of the 2024 to 28 TIP. We'll also reflect on some decisions that were made in the run-up to this federal fiscal year for the 25-29 TIP and illustrate how some of these decisions have led into what will take effect in October, the 26-30 TIP. And then we'll close by asking where some of the projects that may have moved over the past 2 years and shuffled around now fall within today's program for the 26-30 TIP. And of course, we'll also relate this to ongoing discussions that are happening within the TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee, and that this fall will be brought to the full MPO board around project policy updates. And of course, we'll have opportunity for discussion as well. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll just start off with some context on quarterly updates. So quarterly readiness updates were a key component of the operations plan update for this MPO, specifically around the establishment of updated guidelines for information sharing, timeliness of information, and additional levels of detail. The objective, as written in the operations plan of a quarterly update, was to provide detailed project updates from either staff, project proponents, and implementing agencies with regard to specific projects in the regional program. Now, each of the 4 quarters that were identified in the operations plan update coincides with a key programming milestone for the TIP. So for Q1, which is usually presented around December, that is meant to be an early warning or identification opportunity of TIP challenges for the upcoming development TIP. So for this December, that would be for anything that's been identified as a potential threat or challenge for the 2027 to 31 TIP. Q2 is usually the largest of the readiness updates, that being the TIP Readiness Days update, usually happens in late February, and Q3 is meant to reflect changes to the development TIP that may have taken place between when the MPO votes out a draft 27-31 TIP before it endorses a final 2027 to 31 TIP, and that usually happens in May. And again, today's update is meant to be that Q4 update for the end of the federal fiscal year, which happens at the end of September, but we're presenting in August this year. So with that, if we can go on to the next slide, I'll talk specifically about what a Q4 update is meant to do. Where Q4 updates are intended to review projects that had advertised or still need to advertise within federal fiscal year 2025, again, just for the regional target program. Now, while this is the normal objective of a Q4 readiness update, broader challenges that emerged within the fiscal 25 program over this past year of TIP development had indicated that providing some additional context as to why the 25 program will look the way it does as a result of this year in review would help to support decision-making in the near term today around Amendment 14 to the TIP, and also more closely in the fall, or I should say further away in the fall, some of those upcoming MPO policy updates I mentioned around project rescoring and specifically around readiness guidelines for all of the programming years of the TIP. So I'll move now into the next slide, please, around today's objective. The objective of this update is to contextualize the lens of what the MPO board had voted to see advertised over the past 2 years of program development. When the MPO votes to endorse a TIP, that TIP is meant to reflect a vision for what projects should be executed in the programmed years that they are funded within, and how what the board voted to see funded in federal fiscal year 2025 differs from what is actually able to be delivered in federal fiscal year 2025. In other words, what we're talking about here is an element of risk where how the expectations the board set will differ from the outcomes of what will have been delivered by September 30th of this federal fiscal year. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide, we're going to get into some of the actual graphics, and on to the next slide, please. Some of the actual graphics that Adriana helped to develop for this presentation. And I'll first start off by kind of depicting what these graphics will look like for the remainder of the presentation. In the top right-hand corner of the screen, you can see that with this graphic, it illustrates June 2023. Each of these graphics are going to indicate the point in time at which the federal fiscal year 2025 regional target program is developed at, which is to say this is a snapshot in time circa June 2023 for this program. What this slide is showing is the regional target program for federal fiscal year 2025 as of the 2024 to 28 TIP that was endorsed back in June 2023. So for that TIP, a little over 2 years ago now, the MPO board had voted to allocate about $121.7 million of regional target funding, split to have about $101.73 million of that going towards 8 regional target projects within what we'll be referring to as the core investment programs. Now, we've used the phrase core investment programs in the past, but I'll redefine it here as saying that when we say core investment programs, we're talking about larger scale capital construction projects for roadway projects that municipalities are leading. These are the complete streets, the intersection improvements, and also the bicycle and pedestrian projects that are delivered in these years. Other projects like community connections and design funding are depicted separately alongside what we'll be referring to as the transit fill-in projects that are depicted on screen here. For fiscal 25, just to set some context, the board approved back in the 24-28 TIP about $13.4 million for transit fill-ins and $6.5 million for community connections. Now, if we can go on to the next slide, obviously over these past 2 years, these programs have evolved based on different challenges. And within that $101.73 million of core investment program projects, there were 8 regionally prioritized projects that this board had voted to see delivered in federal fiscal year 2025. I'll go through each of these in turn. This won't be the last time we see and talk about these projects, but this is the reconstruction of Route 38 in Wilmington, which was programmed for $23.73 million. I'll jump ahead a bit and go to the reconstruction intersection safety improvements at Route 3A and Bedford Road in Woburn, and also a little bit in Burlington at $1.97 million. Reconstruction safety improvements on Route 3A, the town of Hingham at $15 million. Reconstruction of Boylston Street in the city of Boston for $8.67 million. Rehabilitation of Beecham Street in Everett for $10.55 million. Rehabilitation of Essex Street in the city of Lynn for $19.7 million. And safety and corridor improvements on Broadway in the city of Chelsea for $6.315 million. So again, These are the 8 projects that 2 years ago the board had voted to see delivered in federal fiscal year 2025. I'll also take a moment to go back to the project I skipped earlier, which is the Peabody Independence Greenway project. On screen here, it's depicted at a Peabody parentheses bridge project. The reason being is that during this presentation, there will be 2 Peabody Independence Greenway projects. One may be referred to as the trail project, one may be referred to as the bridge project. There are 2 separate phases of the same project that happen to, at one point, both be programmed in the same advertising year. That Peabody Independence Greenway Bridge project was programmed at $15.78 million. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide, this will then take us more into recent history with the development of the federal fiscal year 25-29 TIP and how things changed between the 24-28 TIP and that TIP development process. If we can go on to the next slide, during 2025 to 29 TIP development, those projects I just mentioned in Hingham, Boston for Boylston Street, Beecham Street in Everett, Essex Street in Lynn, and Broadway in Chelsea were identified as not being able to be delivered in federal fiscal year 2025, leaving only 3 of those original 8 projects actually slated to continue executing within that federal fiscal year. If we can go on to the next slide, the delay of these 5 projects had then led to a fairly substantial amount of what we often refer to as surplus funding during 2025 to 29 TIP development. Specifically, almost 50% of all of the MPO target funding that was available in federal fiscal year 2025 was at an unprogrammed status. Again, we're talking about $51 million here of overall funding. So if we can go on to the next slide, the way that the MPO board voted to reconcile this surplus funding, or I should say it was actually off by 10 million for the surplus, it's $60.25 million of surplus, is that the vast majority of that federal fiscal year 2025 unprogrammed balance was shifted to projects that were not previously subject to regional prioritization, meaning what we're usually calling fill-in projects. And moreover, the vast majority of these fill-ins were not local proponent projects. So that $60.25 million went towards about $2.7 million of community connections, core investment program cost increases, I believe mostly on the Route 38 project in Wilmington, about $9 million, and then $7.1 million of MassDOT fill-in projects. There were 2 fill-in projects included in that $7.1 million. And also a series of cost increases on previously funded transit projects by the MBTA, in addition to some new transit projects by both the MBTA, Metro West Regional Transit Authority, and Cape Ann Transportation Authority. That is about $41.3 million of that $60.2 million surplus going to those transit projects, which again are valuable projects, but are not subject to local proponent status, which is generally the primary objective of the regional target program. If we go on to the next slide, that was a discussion of where we were at during development of the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 TIP, which for context is spring of 2024. As we look at the actual endorsed 2025 to 29 TIP, this gets us towards where we wanted to start with this presentation, which is a year in review. On the next slide, this then takes us into June 2024. Once the 2025 to 29 TIP was endorsed, 43% of all regional target funding, which was slated about $126.6 million availability, was being programmed for transit projects rather than local proponent work. There was still about $62.5 million of funding within that core investment program category, but that was down from the about $101 million that the board had voted to see about a year prior. If we go on to the next slide and the one after that, what happened between June of 2024 and October 2024 was a little bit of an issue around a single project's readiness that led to some changes before the TIP took effect in the form of what was Amendment 1 to the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 TIP. Now, due to some issues around utilities permitting, namely around the condition of a sewer for that Independence Greenway Trail project in Peabody, there was a project that had to be delayed late out of federal fiscal year 2024 quarter 4 into federal fiscal year 2025. The way that that project was delayed at late notice out of that year was by shifting funding that was in fiscal 25 for transit projects up into fiscal 24 and using that resulting unprogrammed balance from 25 to accommodate the delay of the Independence Greenway project. So where we actually started with day one of federal fiscal year 2025 was already a little bit different from what the board had voted on with the endorsed tip for federal fiscal year 2025 to 29. These slides again just show how the funding actually ended up being transferred between the years, amounting to about $9 million, shifting from the transit fill-in projects to the core investment program projects. So on the next slide, after that amendment took place, there were 6 projects within the core investment program that this board had voted to see or expected to see advertised within federal fiscal year 2025. Returning from that previous list of 8 projects I mentioned, that was the Bridges project for the Peabody Independence Greenway, the Woburn reconstruction of Route 3A in Bedford Street, and also the reconstruction of Route 38 in Wilmington, the project that had that $9 million cost increase, actually greater than $9 million cost increase that I mentioned earlier. We also had those 2 MassDOT fill-in projects I mentioned earlier, being the Wellington Greenway Underpass project in the city of Medford and the Safe Routes to School project for Stratton Elementary School in Arlington. And then with Amendment 1 to the tip, that 6th project was the Independence Greenway Extension Trail segment that was now programmed in fiscal 25. So again, this past year, as of October 1st, 2024, there were supposed to be 6 projects that were projected to advertise in fiscal 25. If we can go on to the next program, or next slide. This past winter, when we were developing the federal fiscal year 2026 tip, as of February of this past year, 3 of those 6 projects were already identified during tip readiness days as not being likely to be delivered within federal fiscal year 2025. That being the Wellington Underpass project, the Peabody Independence Greenway Bridges project, and also the Woburn Route 3A and Bedford Street project. And therefore, these projects were delayed to federal fiscal year 2026. If we can go on to the next slide. The remaining 3 projects of those 6 fall into 3 different categories. There's the MassDOT fill-in project, which is the Arlington Stratton Elementary School project, which is still, worth noting, a locally led project. A MassDOT proponent project, which is the reconstruction of Route 38 in Wilmington, and also a project that had missed its federal fiscal year 2024 add date, at late notice in Q4, that Peabody Independence Greenway Extension project. As a result of those 3 other projects being delayed on the next slide, the Medford, Peabody Bridges, and Woburn project, if we can go to the next slide, please. Well, I should say, jump the gun a little bit. Only one of those 3 projects, that project that was in Wilmington, had actually been in that federal fiscal year 2025 program of the 24-28 tip. As we'll get to later, one of the 8 projects the board voted to see delivered in federal fiscal year 2025 had actually stayed in federal fiscal year 2025 over these past 2 years of tip development. Now, if we go on to the next slide, I also want to speak a little bit about cost increases, which we'll get to as well. What had functionally happened is that as these projects were unprogrammed, there was a great deal of funding that was shifted towards transit projects, but also what we had seen in addition to the projects that remained in the program is that many of them were still seeing fairly severe cost increases on them. Specifically, that Wilmington Route 38 project that had stayed had incurred at that point a $13.7 million cost increase due to a scope increase to incorporate additional bridge work into the project contract alongside some additional culvert and drain work in the project area. So if we go on to the next slide, I want to speak a little bit about the action item today and why this quarterly update is or I should say, related to that action item. So on to the next slide, please. As we close out federal fiscal year 2025, there is still one more tip amendment currently that is slated for projects within the federal fiscal year 2025 regional target program. As part of Amendment 14 to the federal fiscal years 25-29 TIP, that Stratton School Improvements Project in Arlington has also been slated for a delay out of federal fiscal year 2025. For purposes of this presentation, I'll mention that it's due to some right-of-way challenges on the project. I'll get into more detail on that in the actual amendment presentation as to what those challenges are. But with the Stratton Elementary School project now slated to be removed from the fiscal 25 program, there are only 2 projects advertising within federal fiscal year 2025. I would also note, if we go on to the next slide, that Amendment 14 also includes yet another cost increase for the Route 38 project in Wilmington, increasing further to $42.1 million as well on that project. So just to bring this all together, because there's been mention of a lot of different dates and a lot of different diagrams and presentations, if we go on to the next slide and the one after that, I want to go back to where we started with the June 2023 program as of the 24-28 TIP. So while there were 8 projects within federal fiscal year 2025 as of 2 years ago, if we go on the next slide, most of the projects that were in that original 8 have found themselves delayed out of federal fiscal year 2025. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So there is one remaining project for fiscal 25, being the reconstruction of Route 38 in Wilmington. That project has a Q4 ad date of, I believe, September 16th. So it still has not advertised yet, and in fact is advertising quite late in the federal fiscal year. And I'll get to that as well in a little bit. But the majority of the remaining projects that had fallen out of fiscal 25 now find themselves in, at best, a federal fiscal year 26 position. But in some cases, we have projects that have fallen into fiscal 27 or federal fiscal year 2028. In fact, on the next slide, it's also worth noting, if we can go to that next slide, please, that one of these projects, which is the Broadway Safety Improvements Project in the city of Chelsea. Can we go back one slide? I think we missed something. Thank you. One of these projects, which is the Broadway Corridor Safety Improvements Project in Chelsea, has also no longer been able to be funded within the Regional Target Program due to cost increases and delays on other projects in the program. During development of the federal fiscal year 2630 TIP, the board voted to shift that project out of the Regional Target Program back into the statewide highway program, where it had originated from about 2 TIP cycles prior. This is to say that as project delays continue and as cost increases continue, it becomes increasingly difficult to make sure that projects that may be ready in a given fiscal year or may be able to be funded in the Regional Target Program can do so. Specifically, to get into that topic of cost increases, as that is the other component of many of these 8 projects on the next slide. On the next slide, please. The ability to incorporate cost increases and delays into the program do not only hinder the projects themselves that are seeing these increases, but are also reducing the ability of the overall Regional Target Program to meaningfully deliver on the MPO's goals, which is to say that the MPO's goals are approached or improved upon by actually seeing projects be executed within the federal fiscal year that they are programmed in. And on the subject of cost increases, as far as where projects have increased in cost from where we saw them 2 years ago, with the Route 38 project in Wilmington, that is a 77% cost increase. The PBD Independence Greenway Bridges contract had, at the time of this presentation, been a 21% cost increase, though I will unfortunately take this opportunity to note that it has seen another cost increase of about $2 million. In addition to that, that was not accounted for in here. The Woburn Intersection project has increased in cost by 147%, the Hingham Route 3A project by 113%, the Boylston Street project by 17%, Beecham Street project 10%, Essex Street project in Lynn an increase of 53%, and the Broadway project in Chelsea an increase of 65%. And to actually put numbers on it here, if we go on to the next slide, well, I've been talking about percentages. We're talking overall about a program of projects that went from being $101.7 million in federal fiscal year 2025 of the 24-28 TIP to being more like $160 million overall for the where the projects all fall now. Specifically, when we're referring to those percent increases earlier, the Wilmington cost increase as originally seen was an $18 million increase, with Hingham 17 million, with Essex Street $10 million. These being the greatest, not only percent increases, but also numerically some of the greatest. And I will also note, not to single out any projects here, but in the case of the Wilmington Route 38 project, as cost increases get greater, when there are projects that have Q4 advertisement dates at a $43 million price tag, that also represents a substantial amount of risk within the regional target program should a project not make a Q4 ad date. This is to say that if the ad date is in mid or late September, there is very little room to maneuver, lest that funding, potential regional target funding, not be programmed to the best possible source or fully utilized even. I'll also just note, again, not to harp on this further, but on the next slide, these cost increases are not new to the overall program. In fact, they are not just new to the past 2 years for these projects. Again, we're not trying to single out any projects here today. This is meant to reflect on the overall status of all of the projects across all federal fiscal years in the program. These projects are just a sample or an indicator for what we may see in the 2026-30 tip as we develop the 27-31 programs. But just to discuss some of the projects here today further, that Independence Greenway Bridges project, when it was initially selected by this MPO for funding, was programmed at $6.3 million for a cost estimate before climbing to $15.8 million when it was programmed in the 2024-28 tip. That project is now at around $23 million based on the latest cost estimate. The trail component of the Independence Greenway was programmed at $2.3 million and increased to $3.9 million, almost doubling, in the 2023-27 tip. And 1 year later, doubled again to $8.2 million, which is the current cost estimate for the project as it is approaching its ad date. And on the next slide, the Route 38 project in Wilmington had initially been funded by the MPO at $12.1 million back in the 2020-24 tip, but doubled in cost already to $25.4 million in the 2022-26 tip. And as a reminder, this project now sits, as of this tip, at $43 million, having started at 12. And on the next slide, the Route 3A project in Hingham had initially been funded for $8.7 million, increasing to $15.5 million in the 2021-25 tip, then shrunk a little bit due to some adjustments on inflation calculations. From $15.1 million went to $28.7 million as of the 25-29 tip, though it rose again from $28.7 million to $32 million in the 2026-30 tip. And again, I'll reiterate that the purpose of mentioning these cost increases and the longer term timeline of how many of these projects have increased substantially multiple times over their life is not to single out any projects, but instead set a context for broader challenges within the program that are impacting all projects that are slated to be advertised and delivered within a given federal fiscal year. On the next slide, I'd like to reiterate what the objective of this presentation was, and that was to demonstrate the sheer gulf between what projects were ready for, what projects were actually ready to be delivered in federal fiscal year 2025 versus what the board's expectations for project delivery were of the project proponents to make those advertising and programming dates. And I'll also note that it's likely that as we approach federal fiscal year 2026, that there are still going to be projects within the fiscal 26 program that are going to see more cost increases and may also see delays out of fiscal 26 into 27. And we'll have to work through the impacts of that in developing the 27-31 tip. But on the next slide, to bring this back towards upcoming action items by this MPO later this fall specifically, as part of work in federal fiscal year 2026, this MPO board is going to be presented with draft policy updates that are intended to better match the outcomes that projects are being delivered under with the expectations that the board is setting when it votes on the projects to be incorporated in the program. Specifically, there are 2 policies that are in development right now with the TIP committee that will be brought to this board for further discussion starting around September towards the end of December. These being around different 5-year design guideline milestones, hearing from project proponents, and also improving policies around project scoring. and these continue to be shaped by the TIP process engagement and readiness committee and will continue to be discussed at the committee's next planned meeting, which staff are currently targeting for September 4th. With that, if we can go on to the next slide, I'm happy to take any questions on this and also circle back to any of the many different diagrams and information presented here today.
Thank you, Ethan. Questions for Ethan? Dennis? All right, let's go to Jay while Dennis tries to unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ethan. I think we've discussed this for like year after year after year, the same issue, and it feels like we keep trying to address this cost increase issue, but I feel like we're addressing it in the wrong way. The recommendations keep coming back as, the cost increases are complex, right? It's a combination of factors. Sometimes a scope increase, sometimes it's change in regulations, sometimes it's cost increases of materials. More often than not, it is not the intent or I would argue the fault of the proponent, and that proponent, whether it's the state or a city, I think is dealing with an environment that just is conducive to these costs going up. And we seem to keep coming back with recommendations that almost feel punitive, like come back and demonstrate that your product is actually worth the money, or give us more updates. And I don't know if any of those things really affect the cost at the end of the day. And so I guess I feel like if we go into this, we need to do a little more than just come back with recommendations to proponents to just make the costs come down or demonstrate that it's worthwhile. We need to really dig into why are these costs going up. I don't think we've done that. And I think there's, again, many reasons. I'm not trying to blame anybody or point fingers, but I just don't think we've had that honest conversation of why costs go up. And I think we ought to have that.
Thank you, Jay. Dennis?
Thanks, and sorry if I couldn't get myself unmuted. Ethan, quick question on the correlation between change in scope and cost increases. There's my gut tells me there must be a high correlation between the two. So we always look at the cost side, but the change of scope is also significant too. And how do we? First of all, is there such a high correlation between the two?
I can kind of speak to some of that. So as Jay kind of mentioned, in addition to how different projects have different contexts, naturally the scope changes are going to differ among them. Generally, any expansion in scope would likely result in an increase in overall labor and unit costs on the project. So generally, yes, you would see cost increases as scope increases. The MPO also does have policies in place that based on the 2021 cost policies around processes that a project proponent would need to conduct, specifically around rescoring if a scope change was incorporated. Though I would note that those policies were not enforced when some projects over these past 2 years saw scope increases for differing reasons. For example, one of the projects presented here today incorporated a new bridge replacement into the project that was not previously incorporated, leading to a fairly large cost increase. We have seen other projects incorporate smaller culverts into the project that lead to lower dollar value increases as well. And sometimes scope increases are also beneficial, but that is part of why I believe the policy was put in place to conduct an evaluation of those changes. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, but the obviously the size of the scope change correlates with the cost. So the small scope changes, there's less cost. Large scope changes, there's a higher cost, right? So the one project that went up from, was it 8 million to 40 million or 12 million to 40 million, obviously was a significant scope change. Do you suggest that there's a trigger that we don't usually monitor or we don't usually review when there is such a large scope change, that we look at the project itself? And who makes the determination whether that scope change is in or out?
So what I would say is that as far as who makes the determination as to funding any cost increases on a scope change, especially if the project is in the regional target program, that is the MPO board's responsibility. MassDOT can make recommendations and the project proponent can make recommendations and indicate preferences as to how the scope should be modified to suit their needs or meet different guidelines. But at the end of the day, it is the MPO that would be responsible for voting to approve a scope change for a project in the regional target program, consistent with also MPO policies on TIP amendments as well.
Other questions or comments? Rowe.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, I guess, clarify like what Ethan was saying. My understanding is that the entities that would approve a change in the scope would be like a combination of the project proponent and MassDOT, assuming this is a project that's going through the MassDOT's process, but then it's up to, I guess, the MPO really to just like decide whether or not to continue funding and at what level. So I guess I just wanted to make sure there's like this differentiation between decisions about a project's design and scope, and then kind of, I think the MPO board's, decision making is really around whether to continue the funding and at what level. That's correct.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
But so Ethan, so I think Jay's and Dennis's questions were two sides of the same coin. Like, do you have an analysis of how much of or which projects had scope change as opposed to which projects just went up in cost because of inflation, right? Or whatever reason of, we programmed it in a year, it didn't get ready. It's still the same exact project, but it's 2 years later, it costs more money. Or, God forbid, we all did terrible budgeting at the beginning and this project was never a $1 million project. It was always a $10 million project and we just all did a terrible job of budgeting. Do we have a sense of like how much of the cost increase is actually related to scope changes and how much is related to whatever other factors, to Jay's point, there could be, many of them outside of anyone's control, some of them within our control?
Right. So over the past year, consistent with the operations plan updates around information sharing, staff have begun to learn more about which of these projects had scope increases. To be frank, in some of these cases, project proponents changed the scopes of projects without informing the MPO, and all the MPO was presented with was the cost increase for that project. There are other cases where we know more about the actual scope or any changes to unit costs. We learned, for example, during the fiscal 2630 tip about different changes in tunnel types on the Belmont Community Path, for example, and how that was impacting cost alterations. But I can't say with this group of 8 projects that we have an incredibly detailed understanding of what the key drivers were. But the objective of this presentation was not necessarily to litigate individual projects and why they increased in cost, so much as illustrate the program-wide impact of these collective cost increases, not just in fiscal 25, but also looking ahead to future years. So the short answer is no there, but the longer answer is we are working to try to make that more clear and get that information to the board before it votes on these changes.
Other questions for Ethan? John Strauss.
Thanks, John. David, rather. The question I just had is your general thrust in this proposal trying to get us to refine or improve somehow our requests to the project so that get them on track, so they deliver to us a little better estimates? Are we trying to change our procedures and what we expect when these people put projects into the tip for our consideration for funding?
Yes, so this is a good opportunity to, I think, better explain those policies I had mentioned that are going to come in future MPO meetings. One of the policies that actually relates to earlier questions around scope changes is the TIP project scoring policies that have been discussed, which functionally allow for an opportunity for MPO staff and the board to renew their understanding of what projects are being funded in the TIP, what their scopes look like, what their costs look like, and whether or not those projects with revised scopes continue to be consistent with the MPO's vision and goals. For the readiness part of it, that relates to a 5-year guidelines policy, which is meant to check or better establish standards across all years of the TIP as to which projects should be included and funded in which years of the TIP. So while we're not presenting anything looking for action here today, this is more to tee up future conversations that these policies relate to and that these project challenges sort of bore forth, if that makes sense.
Other questions or comments? Oh, wait, I've got Tom O'Rourke. I'm sorry, Tom O'Rourke.
Thank you, David. Ethan, another great, excellent presentation. Thank you for that. I just had a question. I think I saw early in the presentation, you talked about $120 million being directed towards regional target program. And because projects weren't ready to accept the funds, about 40 million of that went to transit projects. Is that correct, the way I read that?
So that's a good question. At that time, it was about $40 million of that went to transit projects from the T, MWRT, and CADA. I'll also take this opportunity to note that due to other changes that have taken place since, the overall regional target program has about 70 million now going to transit projects of the 120 million.
So when we agonized over how to fund these projects and which projects to fund, we made our decisions, and then after the fact, because things couldn't be met, this big chunk of money went to transit, even though it's not the way we had originally planned it to go.
Correct, yes. Due to a lack of municipal proponent projects, as far as projects that could be delivered in that time, the MPO voted to fund those projects that were provided by transit authorities, the T, and MassDOT.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I understood that right.
Right, but so Ethan, just to follow up, that's a readiness issue, not there were so many projects over budget, right? We're talking about two different things in this presentation. One is budget and cost, and the other is readiness. The fact that we gave $70 million to transit is that we had a bunch of projects that we had planned to get ready in 25 that did not get ready, right?
Yes, absolutely. I will also note that the other component of that staff wanted to elevate with this presentation is that the municipal proponent status of those projects, while many of these projects are local priorities for where they are delivered, they do not originate locally. And part of the spirit of the regional target program as envisioned by the board is for those local proponents, which is why I mentioned that. I do agree overall that these are worthy projects. Just wanted to highlight the overall percentage that is not going to local proponent projects in that case.
General?
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess wanted to touch on I guess two things. One, just connected to the recent conversation about the transit projects. I did want to note that I guess one process improvement that we've made over the past year and a half or so is that, you know, anticipating that the continued pattern of the readiness challenges and delays, freeing up surplus funding in the inner years, we have kind of requested earlier on in the process projects from the transit agencies to be able to at least kind of score these projects, understand them a little bit better, and try to like choose ones that are aligned with regional priorities. Though, you know, of course, it, you know, not the, you know, intent of the regional target program necessarily to be funding this transit projects to this level. But I did want to note that that's like something we have been able to do, and thank the transit, the T, and the RTAs for working with us on that. And then the second thing is I did want to kind of just highlight again, I think take it announced at the beginning that the next TIP committee meeting, I believe it's being scheduled for September 4th at 2:30. There'll probably be more communication going out about that. But if anyone wants to kind of dig in a little bit more to sort of some of the proposals we have, you know, to try to do our best to wrap, kind of find some ways to, you know, we're not going to solve these challenges within one cycle, but certainly try to take another stab at reining them in. welcome anyone to join that.
Thank you, Jen. I unfortunately have to leave, so Julia is going to take over the chair. Julia, you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
All right, then I'll let you call and take it, and I'll say, see everybody in a couple weeks. Bye.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. I think we were just wrapping up this part of the discussion, but I do see Tegan's hand up. Having trouble hearing Tegan. Anybody else? It looks like you are unmuted, but wait, there.
Yeah, sorry, I have several settings and sometimes they don't line up well.
Uh,
Thank you. I just wanted to elaborate. I think David Moeller is absolutely right in that there are two very core kind of topics embedded in this conversation, which is the readiness and the funding. But I think what this presentation helps illuminate is how much they can also affect each other. So delays in readiness certainly contributes to at least inflationary cost increases, if not, other complications. And on the other hand, when we see a bunch of cost increases, if we can no longer have a project go in the year that we originally intended, that project might get pushed out, or we will select a project to push out, which again, as a result, may experience some cost increases. So it is very intertwined as well as being two kind of separate core ideas. And so that is I think what we were hoping to also help illuminate and sort of pulling together the complexity of the influences of all of these different changes over the last couple of years.
Anybody have any other questions I want to add to this discussion? Okay, I don't see none. I don't have power to advance the slides, but oh, no one wants to add to this. This is a big one here. I know it's been hard to follow and understand. Eric and I have had conversations with some of the cities and towns with these projects to try to understand not just what you see on paper, but what sort of goes on the ground, and it's complicated. We're ready to, I ask for a motion to approve this amendment.
First, there'll be a presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Julie, you had to step in last minute, I know, to replace, so we didn't get you ready for this, but there'll be a presentation and then there'll be an ask for a motion in a second.
Okay, that would be jumping the gun a little bit. Yes, I'll hand it over to Ethan then to give his presentation.
Thank you. And yes, as a continuation of the last presentation, staff are presenting Amendment 14 to the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 TIP, which is anticipated currently to be the final amendment for regional target program projects within the 2025 to 29 TIP. We can go on to the next slide. In the prior presentation, I had mentioned that there were changes slated for the delivery date for the Stratton School Safe Routes to School Improvements project in Arlington, and also a cost increase on the reconstruction of Route 38 in Wilmington. These two project changes are included in this amendment with some additional detail there. There's also a cost increase on a statewide highway program project, which is the Route 28 and Chickatobit Road intersection project in Milton. Now, before we get into individual projects, I also want to note that given the end of the federal fiscal year is approaching, there is insufficient time to conduct even the minimum 15-day comment period that is allowable for this amendment under the public engagement plan. And as a result, staff will be requesting at the end of this amendment to make sure these changes are all captured before the end of the fiscal close, that this board votes to waive a public comment period before endorsing the amendment. If we can go on to the next slide, just to get into specific project changes here. Each slide is going to have one project each. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the first project change here is the Stratton School Safe Routes to School Improvements project in Arlington, which is funded in fiscal 2025 for $2.3 million of regional target funding. Now, again, this is a MassDOT fill-in project that was incorporated into federal fiscal year 2025 in the 25-29 tip, but Safe Routes to School projects are locally led projects with that are also organized and led by MassDOT in tandem. So this is still a local proponent project. With that being said, the project is proposed for a delay out of federal fiscal year 2025 into 2026 due to complications that arose during the right-of-way assessment process, specifically around assessment of easements for private ways and the like. I'd be happy later to allow one of my colleagues to speak more to that. But it is worth noting that by delaying this project to federal fiscal year 2026, it enables the town of Arlington to reconcile some of the cost issues for these right-of-way assessments with its select board and to achieve resolution there. I will note that delaying this project out of federal fiscal year 2025 into 2026 does trigger a need for a tip amendment to be conducted for the 2630 tip once that tip takes effect. That program for the regional target fiscal 26 program has an available unprogrammed balance of $2.67 million. So this project's budget of $2.3 million can be delayed into 26 without creating any issues around fiscal constraint. With that said, I will note that staff are becoming increasingly aware of cost increases to other projects in fiscal 26 already. So that is something that we will reiterate once the 2630 tip takes effect and discuss further there. But for now, we're just talking about fiscal 25. On the next slide for the next project, we have the reconstruction of Route 38 Main Street from Route 62 to the Woburn City line. This project is currently programmed for the fiscal 25 program at $37.5 million with an anticipated new total federal participating cost of $42.1 million. Now, this project is slated to advertise September 13th of 2025, and this cost increase is beyond available regional target dollars to support that elevated amount. Now, I will note as well, someone caught this earlier, that the figure here of about $1.78 million of statewide highway funding being allocated to support the increase differs from what is listed in the table that was posted for this amendment. That difference is about $90,000. The reason being was actually the adjustment for action that the MPO board voted to endorse. By endorsing adjustment for, the MPO board freed up about an additional $90,000 of target funding, which will be incorporated into this project's cost increase. Thus, the difference between the number presented on the slide, as far as the statewide share, and the number that's listed on the posted table. I will also note, just for this project, that the development of the 25-29 tip had already incorporated a cost increase from $23.7 to $37.5 million to reflect the incorporation of bridge work that was bundled into the project scope. And in the earlier presentation, we mentioned that this project was first funded at $12.1 million. As far as rationale for this further cost increase, the new cost for final design includes full replacement of culverts in the project area beyond what was previously considered. That's about $1 million of the increase. And there are also other elements that have been incorporated, including about $2.2 million of utility work for Verizon assets and additional expansion of a retaining wall in the project area for $1.2 million. There's also a temporary pedestrian bridge that's planned in the project area, though that's only about a few $100,000 compared to the overall cost increase. I see John has his hand up. I don't know if I misspoke there.
I just wanted to clarify, Ethan, that we had a culvert within the project limits that we were going to repair. And as we dug into it a little bit more deeply with the design, we didn't feel that a repair was really a workable solution, and it, attaching to something that had started to deteriorate and was older infrastructure. So we kind of pivoted and went to a replacement. And I just thought that in, the message of MassDOT bundling bridge work is, I don't know if that's the right term, and I apologize how it was provided to you. I just wanted to state that originally we were going to repair it, and then as we got into it, it really wasn't repairable, and we pivoted to a replacement. And that's the reason for the cost increase. And because of the replacement, we're using a temporary pedestrian bridge so that while we are doing that replacement, we can maintain connectivity for bike and peds within the project limit. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's all.
For that clarification, John.
Yeah, thank you. So with that in mind, with all of these increases, that's about a $4.65 million increase on this project, about $1.78 million of which would be slated for coverage from the statewide highway program due to insufficient target availability on the regional target program. And last but not least, on the next slide is the third project, this being a statewide highway program project. The intersection improvements at Route 28 Randolph Avenue and Chickatobit Road, which is slated for a cost increase of about $3.6 million, up from $9.1 million to $12.7 million. This project recently attained final design back on June 20th, 2025. The prior 100% design was from September 20th, 2024. It is worth noting this project has been amended on the tip several times. Back in the 24-28 tip and 23-27 tip due to various right-of-way and environmental permitting delays on the project, which have also led and contributed to many of the mitigations that may be incorporated into this project's cost. Similar to the Stratton School Improvements project, although an inverse situation, during development of the 2026-30 tip, those right-of-way and permitting delays led to the project being proposed for fiscal 26 in the statewide highway program, where it currently resides. So in what I'll refer to as Amendment 1 to the fiscal 26-30 tip, that amendment will remove the Chickatobit Road project from fiscal 2026 such that it would make its 2025, or I should say its fiscal 25 advertisement date of September 6th. So again, there will be an amendment in a later tip that indicates that this project successfully advertised in fiscal 25, whereas the next tip currently slates it for 26. Now it's a little bit confusing, but just giving some advance notice on that. With that, if we can go on to the next slide, I'll reiterate that again. On the next slide, please. Due to insufficient time to incorporate these cost and readiness changes before the end of federal fiscal year 2025, with a public comment period incorporated into this amendment, MPO staff and MASS are requesting that the board votes to waive the comment period for this amendment and endorse Amendment 14 and its cost increase and schedule changes as presented. Again, I'll reiterate that the minimum allowable comment period for this amendment would be 15 days otherwise, but cannot be accommodated before the books need to close for federal fiscal 25. And I'm happy to take any questions on this.
Questions on today's requested action before we proceed to a vote? All right, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve this amendment? Aaron?
Aaron Shute, motion to approve the amendment as presented.
Second? John?
John Alessi, and I'll second that. I just don't know if we have to say that we're going to waive the public comment period as well. But if so, I'll make that motion supplemented.
All right. David, please call the roll.
Thank you, Juliet. I'll call on Liris Lieto.
Liris Lieto, yes.
Sandy Johnson.
Sandy Johnson, yes.
Tyler Tarasi.
Tyler Tarasi, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Julia Wallers.
Julia Wallers, yes.
Hannah Switlikowski.
Anna Swilakowski, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Matt Moran.
Matt Moran, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kosis.
David Kosis, yes.
John Alessi.
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute.
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Nate Ryan,
Nate Ryan, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
John Strauss,
John Strauss, yes.
Rachel Benson,
Rachel Benson, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Dave. All right. We've made it to the final item on our agenda before members' items, and I will hand it over to Tegan for a presentation about our response to this RFI from USDOT on the reauthorization.
Thanks very much, Julia, and hello again, everybody. And I just want to say thank you for the conversation so far in this meeting. I have I think, relatively brief presentation about a way that we as the Boston Region MPO, through my submission of a document, can actually provide input into the next transportation reauthorization. So my goal in this is to let you know, keep you informed, talk about the content, discuss if you have any questions, and just kind of ensure that we're moving forward. We're not asking necessarily for a vote, so it would be more of a without objection, I would move forward with this, this input. So with that, next slide. Next slide one more time. So you actually should find a draft document posted in the meeting materials that if you've read it, or you could look at it before, during, or after I'm speaking. But the idea here is that the USDOT released a request for information called Advancing a Service Transportation Proposal that focuses on America's most fundamental infrastructure needs. They are presenting it as an opportunity for MPOs, along with state, local governments, and any other affected stakeholder, but they do call it MPOs, to provide input into the development of the next federal surface transportation bill reauthorization. So with the current authorization, the bipartisan infrastructure law, set to expire in September of next year, this is a really important time and moment to advocate for reauthorization to include more support for and better empower MPOs in the roles that MPOs have to be stewards of federal dollars, ensuring that they're being spent efficiently and in support of the region's goals. So as the executive director of this MPO, I think it's really important that we have some input into this process. So as I mentioned, there's a drafted letter that is posted online that you can look at. And I'm just going to go through a couple of summary points just to sort of help understand if I have your buy-in, and then move forward with submitting the response. I will say the content in this letter is very closely aligned with the priorities that have been established by the National Association of MPOs, or AMPO, with some tweaks and some deletions to kind of line it up better, more directly with our needs here in the Boston region, and also in the context of how we operate as an MPO with our state and local partners. You may recall that the last annual meeting, AMPO's staff did come to the annual meeting and talked about the priorities for reauthorization that they were putting forward. So you may, some of these things may seem familiar if you're at that meeting, and if not, again, feel free to ask questions. So next slide, please. So first, these are the themes that USDOT has stated are important to them. I'm definitely not going to read each bullet, but just a quick short version of each one. They're focused on transportation safety, accelerating project delivery, increasing opportunities like through economic growth, congestion relief, et cetera, and then strengthening the partnerships with states and other stakeholders like MPOs to have better outcomes in terms of the investment of federal dollars. So we organized a response to this RFI in these 4 categories. Next slide. So in terms of enhancing safety, in the letter we emphasize how critical regional perspectives are in assessing and addressing safety issues. And especially since we've been able to recently leverage the Safe Streets and Roads for All funding to develop regional action plans that look at the highest safety concerns and potential mitigations across the region. And because we also have the ability as a body to provide technical and capital support to local municipalities to help address some of these issues, especially municipalities with less resources. With all of that, we think that MPOs are uniquely positioned to ensure that federal dollars are used to the best of their ability towards safety interventions. So we advocate for more eligibility and more eligibility for the funding and more decision-making authority over funding related to safety programs, and that this can really build on the success of the SS BRA program. It could look like some of the shift of the SS BRA competitive funds into formula funds for MPOs. So those needs are sort of being met across the country in a more even way. Next slide, please. So in terms of accelerating project delivery, there's a couple of elements to this. First, the idea is to reinforce that MPOs can, and in some cases should be, direct recipients of the funding. The SS BRA program, again, was an example of how MPOs became direct recipients rather than funds being passed through states and then on to MPOs. So across the country, most of the funds that we are working with, our PL dollars, capital dollars, flow through states. And in many states, there are additional requirements and contracts that get layered onto the use of those funds, while the state then ensures they have the responsibility of ensuring the compliance with the federal regulations. So being able to be a direct recipient could streamline the flow of federal dollars, but MPOs do need to pick up the responsibility of compliance with federal regulations in a more direct way as well. So we may or may not be ready to do that in our state, but the idea is to promote that there's a piloting opportunity for states and MPOs that feel really ready for this to sort of practice this, because it also can help alleviate burden on the states of working to kind of manage those federal requirements. In terms of the separate bullet, carryover and kind of consistent and standardized process for carryover of all federal funds. Right now, carryover is allowed for planning funds, the PL funds, which is the core of the funding we use to do our work, and some capital dollars. But the guidance that the feds provide is not in this bill, is not yet really clear enough to consistently enable MPOs across the country to really spend down those balances. And in many cases, states actually don't even allow access to those carry funds, even though they still exist until they lapse. And really, the lack of spending that money is a detriment to everybody, because those are the funds that we're eligible to spend. And if we don't spend it, it lapses and it goes back, to the federal government. So we all should have an interest in making sure that we can spend down the various balances that we have in these funding programs. So the third bullet on here is that it's kind of around the idea that this administration has expressed some preference for streamlining what is a cumbersome process in terms of environmental review, but still a very important one because it is focused on environmental protection. So we've sort of adopted AMPO's very carefully worded language that some streamlining can and should occur without compromising environmental protection. And an example of that might be for smaller projects, that it could really be streamlined relative to really big projects with really big impacts. But on the flip side, we in AMPO also argues that by funding more support to the planning work leading up to the NEPA process will help resolve and address some of the potential future delays more upfront. So support for additional planning funds, which leads us to the next slide in category. So in order to increase, opportunities and access to transportation and the benefits, we strongly believe that additional planning funds are essential, especially though paired with the second bullet in this list around reducing the local match. So once again, PL funds are the foundational formula dollars that MPOs across the country are given to be able to do our federally required work and then some. And AMPO shares an interesting statistic, which is that planning is less than 1% of the total formula dollars, which doesn't really line up when you think about the percentage of design costs typically associated even just with a construction project. So they also point out that planning requirements have been increasing over time, but that percentage has not changed. And so the idea is to increase the percentage of federal dollars going to the PL funds or increasing PL funds. And at the same time, related to the reducing the local match, if the local match were reduced without an increase in federal funds, MPOs would actually be getting less money because we are also supplemented with the 20% local match, which the state currently provides. So a combination of increasing the amount of funds and reducing the match could also represent a good sort of reduction in burden for our state partners as well, fiscally and procedurally. And then lastly, I will build on what I've been saying already about the SS4A funding. I mentioned it before, but in this particular section, there's a proposal to shift as much as is feasible and reasonable, competitive, or what's been known as discretionary funding sources into formula funds to give us more predictable funding flows to address the issues we're being asked to address, and also to streamline, because applying for competitive grants is very complex and takes a lot of resources. So again, SS4A is a great example of a funding source that may be able to be shifted to formula to help support MPO's goals. Then lastly, next slide. We are advocating to the feds for really as much clarity as we can get from them and consistency in terms of what MPO's roles are, specifically in project selection, and also in terms of coordination with the state on the development of the STIP. There is a wide range of how this works across the country, and it's often not helpful for us, but in other states, some MPOs essentially have no project selection role, with DOTs defining what all of those capital federal dollars should be used for in the TIP. Or on the flip side, there are some places where, like in Minnesota, the MPO has a role in coordinating the selection of all projects, including state-funded ones, early in the process. So it's just a lot of variety, and there's some seeking out of more clarity, even though we also recognize that flexibility is still important to maintain when states have different laws, and there's different contexts for how we work. So next slide. So I hope these requests feel relevant and intuitive to you all, especially those of you who've already heard from AMPO. But I want to emphasize that while this is catered to our region in the way that my staff, we have worked on framing this document, there is certainly content in here that we intend to sort of lift up the MPO roles across the country and their ability to meet the federal requirements and also advance local priorities in a regional perspective. So with that, I would be happy to discuss any further. And if the board does not object after this conversation, we'll be submitting this input to the US DOT in response to the RFI. I can turn it back to you, Julia.
Tegan, it's very interesting. Anyone have any questions for Tegan? Jen Rowe?
First, thank you for sharing this and preparing this response. I think that, yeah, everything makes a lot of sense to me in terms of what could make the work we do more impactful. And then I guess my question is whether, I know the city of Boston, we've been working on a response to this RFI as well. Is this something that beyond submitting this on behalf of the MPO that you'd be looking for municipal sign-ons as well, or I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think it is important that as many of us different stakeholders as possible submit input into this reauthorization. I think that municipalities will have your own context that you're sort of framing this within, but what I would certainly request, since there's such a close relationship between the regions and local governments to be able to successfully implement projects with these federal funds, that folks look at the AMPO guidance as it currently exists and adopt what you feel makes sense as appropriate. So I think it's important to have a municipal perspective, a regional MPO perspective, even a state perspective. So I can offer sort of that through this process, but then I'd be really appreciative and also happy to be helpful and discuss if you're willing to take a look at those AMPO priorities as well and decide which fit your needs.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you. Steve Olenoff.
Yeah, Tegan, I was wondering, is this the first time this has been done? Because I don't recall you having, or any of your predecessors having done this before. And is this going to federal highway, or is it getting beyond that? You have any idea whether it's getting beyond that to the actual congressional committee that actually works on this and comes out with a final product?
Two great questions. One, not in my knowledge, I think that we have been sort of progressing throughout these last several years into being a little clearer about sort of the policy like groundwork that this board wants to operate within. And I don't recall in past work before I took on this role and was on the board that we took that kind of approach to directly providing input into these like reauthorization processes. So I think it is not done. One thing we've also been doing throughout the last couple of years is just coordinating with when folks are asking for input into certain like legislative priorities. We'll coordinate with like MAPC, government affairs staff, for example, and we'll just try to help make sure that we think that the MPO perspective is sort of appropriately like reflected in those documents. So I would say it's newer for us. I do not know, this document is not intended for the elected audience. It's kind of about continuing to walk that line between we cannot lobby and we will not lobby. So we will not ask for a specific law or advocate for that. We're cautious about how we engage with public officials. But this is really intended. US DOT has asked for input. We have this kind of aimed at them as the target audience. In the meantime, groups like AMPO is lobbying. They are lobbying the Hill and the legislators there with similar priorities. So they can do that work because they can use non-federal funds to do that work. And we stay more in this sort of like education and like input role into the US DOT.
Thank you, Dennis. Giambetti? Sorry, I thought I saw your hand up.
I saw it, but maybe he got his question answered.
Maybe you answered his question already so thoroughly. Anybody have any other questions?
Sorry. I have trouble unmuting myself today for some reason. Quick question for Tegan. Would it be a stronger letter, or would it be appropriate for the communities, all communities, to sign that letter? All of us?
I think that is a powerful statement. To be frank, if we were going to do something like that, we would need to start talking about it earlier. Like some boards of MPOs across the country have worked early and come to an agreement on common priorities and goals and policy goals, so that when a reauthorization opportunity like this comes up, which by the way, I think they extended it by a week or so, but it needs to go in pretty quickly, that they then already know that there's agreement around these policies, and then that everybody on the board can actually sign on to that. In our case, I think we have some tension in that without establishing that and having that conversation well in advance of the need to submit input, we might find that there are some tensions and differences in priorities between, state, regional, and local entities that it would make it hard to very quickly shift into like everybody signing on to this one letter. I don't know if others would, but we can share this and it could be shared by multiple people. I would love to get to the point one day when we can submit something as the MPO rather than the executive director overseeing the staff, but it'll take us some work to get there. That's what they'd like.
Great, thanks.
Jen Rowe?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe provide some context that I've heard, although if I got any of this wrong, someone else could correct me. My understanding is that this RFI came out fairly unexpectedly, or like folks weren't expecting this to come out before it did, and that like the reauthorization process, at least when I was at NACTO, people were assuming that it wouldn't like the kind of politics of it wouldn't be such that reauthorization would or one with more policy implications rather than just like a continuing resolution at the existing kind of funding levels would actually occur prior to the midterm elections. So anyway, I just wanted to note that yeah, this isn't maybe something we could have predicted that happening quite in the way it has, but that some of those existing dynamics are still in place. So it's still maybe a little unclear whether we're going to end up with something that is more substantial in the next year or two, or if we are going to it's going to be punted a little bit and something will be coming down, later on.
I'm just nodding my agreement that I think that context is well thought through and fully applicable.
Any other questions or contributions to this discussion? All right, seeing none, we can move on to members' items. Anyone have anything to add for today? Notices of note? I see John Alessi in Arlington.
Thanks, Julia. I just want to make a little personal announcement that this is actually going to be my last MPO meeting serving the town of Arlington. I'm actually going to be transitioning into a new role. Soon I'm going to be going to the private sector working for the McClure consulting firm, where I'm going to be taking the lead on their planning work and for transportation projects and kind of leading the engagement with municipalities. So I just want to thank all of the MPO staff, board members for all of the work we've completed before. I know this board's accomplished some great things, and I'm excited to see where things go. And just want to point out that Len Diggins will most likely be the primary designee moving forward. And yeah, just want to say thanks. And the transportation world's a small world, and I know I'll see you all soon. So just want to say thanks, and yeah.
Thank you, John. That's big news. Thanks for sharing it with us and for all your contributions to this board, to the region, to Arlington. And I'm sure it's not the last we'll hear from you. Like you said, it's a small world. Any other announcements, news to share? Thursday funnies? Yes. Let's keep your eye on the chat. All right, well, if there's no more members' items, I want to thank you for bearing with me in my clunky stepping in to chair this meeting. Thanks for that. And I will go ahead and call for a motion to adjourn. Tom Ben?
Good afternoon. I will say, I will put that motion forward to adjourn today.
Second? John?
I'll second that.
That seems right that you should be closing us out today. Okay, I don't think we need a roll call. Is that correct?
Nope.
No, we can.
That objection. Yeah.
All right, no objections. If anyone wants to keep on the discussion, otherwise, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck, John.